For all my women out there, I just want you to know that you are a boss. Women have to be at the table for technology and innovation, and if not, we'll simply create our own. Don't feel like you shouldn't be a part of the tech space just because there aren't many women in the room. That's exactly why we need you to be there. Girl, don't forget to rep your set in these tech spaces, aka rep your culture. You are the face of technology and the face of the future. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, guys. Y'all already know, subscribe. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. I have links to that below. And if you're using an app or a website and you can't see links below, you can go to wildwaytech.com/podcast and you can get access to all that information. Or just follow us at Women in Tech with Ariana on Facebook or Instagram. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode with Women in Tech with Ariana. Today, guys, we have a super special guest, B. Pagels Minor. B is a social activist, global lead for Trans at Netflix, global lead for Black at Netflix, and also a full-time product manager. So we're going to ask so many good questions today, dive into their journey, talk about how they're managing to do all these things at once, and just so much more about their journey in tech. So B, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start from the beginning. I always like to ask my guests this question. Where are you originally from and currently based?
Yes, I'm originally from Mississippi, so like legit Mississippi, which nobody actually claims, but I actually do claim it. And I now live in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how you said legit Mississippi because people are always like claiming, I guess bigger cities and stuff. So that's great. Mm-hmm. So what was your intro into technology? Like what inspired you to get into this space?
So basically I graduated in 2008 and I thought I was going to be a consultant and then eventually become an attorney. But if everyone remembers 2008 was a complete shit show. The economy completely tanked. And so my wonderful consulting job that was like what was expected of me went under 3 months after I started. And I was actually slinging tea at Teavana and doing every like odd job possible to pay my bills. Yeah. And I actually got a job at Target as a store manager. And as the store manager, what my team kept telling me is they were just like, B, you should not be here. They're like, you literally hate your job. You love us, but you actually hate your job. And they were like, what do you like? And I was like, well, the only part of this store that I really enjoy is being in electronics. And they were like, well, maybe you should figure out how to do electronic stuff. And so I ended up actually applying to this like joint MIS MBA program. So MIS is a Master of Information Systems. And they were basically like, well, we'll teach you how to manage technology teams. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like I could go and I could figure out how to manage some technology teams. And through that program, I actually found my first tech job. And so they had access to a lot of different career fairs and things like that. And so I went to the career fair and I met a guy named Brian who had founded a company called ShareCell. And then I became, tech support person. And so that was my first, my first foray into technology. And I loved it so much. And I just kind of haven't left it.
Wow. That's amazing. I love how, all the different guests who come on the show, like, their backgrounds are so different, but I love that this one's so practical. You're like, well, crap happened, right? I had to figure it out, did all the multiple odd jobs, and then landed an opportunity or got exposure, right? That got you right into the industry. So let's talk about your background, right? So I know your background is in product management and you've worked for companies like Cars.com, Sprout Social, and even Apple. So what got you into product management? And what was that journey like going through those companies?
Yeah, so I actually started off with ShareCell. So what would happen is I kept progressively getting promoted. And the more I got promoted, the more exposure I actually had to our clients. And our clients would say things like, well, you have this report, but it doesn't do this. Why? And then I would just go to like my CTO and I go, I don't understand why actually we don't have this. Like every single person asks for the same exact thing. So it seems like we should just build that thing. And, after he and I kind of went back and forth, I started doing some, research and started looking into it. And I was like, oh, normally companies have these things called product managers. And I say normally, like it was like product management was completely like something every company had back in like 2010 or whatever. Yeah. That's not true, right? Like it was really much more like a very large corporations at it, not necessarily your mom and pop shop tech companies. But when I actually started looking into the what makes technology companies successful, you start seeing, Marty Kagan, you start seeing like these like leaders who are talking about how to successfully make products work. And then I was just like, okay, they are talking about this product manager role and how this person, although a term they use then, which I now don't like, is like, you're the CEO of your product, right? But I was like, oh, but we actually do need someone like that, right? At the time, I was like, this is what we need at this company. And so I started, kind of helping to influence and things like that at that company. But then I actually, once I decided that was what I wanted to do, I actually started looking at the career paths. And so like it was like, oh, you have to go be a business analyst. And then once you become a business analyst, then you can get promoted to associate product manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I set out to do. And in fact, when I left Shericel, I actually went to become a business analyst in a DBA too, which by the way, how I convinced someone to hire me as a BBA, like that's some stuff. Like I was like, I really should have gone into sales because like I legitimately hate doing database stuff, but I was like, I know enough. I can get this job as long as you give me the business analyst title too. And so that really was like my foray, like, being able to see what was broken in my organization and how we weren't delivering value to our customers in the way that made sense really helped me learn, like, well, it inspired me to be curious about how we could do it better. And that curiosity led me to product management.
That's amazing. Now, okay, let's get into that, right? And the product management side. So, like, because of technically your background wasn't originally tech, right? And then you got this exposure and started to get more inspired and look at the pathways so that you could get to where you are today. But what advice do you have for someone who, maybe they want to get into being a business analyst, or even like you said, like the way that you negotiated, like someone to hire for that? What advice do you have for people who are making those types of career changes? And they were interested like you were years ago?
Yeah. So first and foremost, this is actually something I talk about all the time. So like, definitely you can check out my blog or like different YouTube videos I've made about this, because it really starts off with doing an analysis of who you are, right? Like, so one of the reasons I'm a really good product manager is that I can go into a room, command a room, and convince people to follow my plan, essentially, right? And that's a huge thing with being a product manager. If you can't do that, chances are you're not going to be super successful at being a product manager. And so you have to do that due diligence to start looking at your own strengths, your weaks, your opportunities, your threats, and then start figuring out how you can turn some of those things. Like, so for instance, one of my actual biggest opportunities when I first started out was I actually lacked follow through. Like, I'm one of those classic people who would always say, yeah, I'll go do that thing, but I never actually did it. And then since no one held me accountable, I would not do it.
Yeah.
And so like so in order to be a great product manager, I have to be the most accountable person in my organization, right? Like I have to be above reproach. If I tell someone I'm going to get a document, or I'm going to find out an answer, or I'm going to figure this out, by Wednesday, I have to do it by Wednesday every single time. So I actually had to completely change my personality to be someone who does that. Yeah. And so that's the thing. Like, so my first step is always assess yourself, assess who you are, assess what makes you passionate, right? Like, so for instance, even, when I think about my current career path, I was talking to my manager the other day and I was like, you know what? I'm not sure if I want to do this type of product management for the rest of my career. Yeah. It's like, I think I want to do product management for sure, but like, I'm starting to see that I need a little bit more complexity. Like it has to be a little bit more like confusing. That's a weird word to use, but actually it has to be a little bit more like crazy. Like I really thrive in environments where it feels like it's a little bit like too much, like you're holding on by the seat of your pants a little bit. I actually really like that for some reason, which also might say a lot about my personality, but it is a part of who I am. And so you have to, but so it's also a constant assessment, right? Like, so it doesn't stop the first time you do it. And so let's say if you're talking about being a business analyst, so you first find out what the role entails, right? So when I was a business analyst, they were like, okay, so you have to write all the requirements for these different documents. You have to be able to speak well to the engineers and make sure the engineers understand exactly what you're talking about. You have to learn the tech lingo, right? Mm-hmm. And that was like actually the biggest thing for me, because like I was this person who had only gone to school for this thing. And so actually learning the job lingo was very difficult. So then I had to figure out, how do you learn from other people, or how do you create relations with people that they will tell you information? And so I had to actually read about that. I was like, how do you convince people to help you? Right. And so that's the type of work you have to do when you're trying to look into a different industry, especially a different career path. Like, you have to figure out how to take on partners who are going to help develop you, because you can't really read skills, right? You have to have people teach you, and then continue to teach you and hold you accountable to actually utilizing that information.
Wow, you dropped a lot of good gems. A lot of these things, I'm like, we got to circle back on that. One thing I really want to ask you, B, is like, what if so it sounds like you work with tons of different types of people, right, as a product manager. And so what advice would you give or strategies to folks who maybe it doesn't even matter if they're technical or not, but they're trying to navigate convincing people to believe in their idea or believe that the project is going one way, but maybe you, because of your analytic skills, you figured out a better way to do it to make it more efficient and cost effective. So what are some of those things that you constantly use with your team to kind of just improve and make sure that everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it starts before you even start doing the work, right? Like it's so important to build great relationships and build great trust with people. Like, I always spend like probably the first month to 6 weeks of my time at any company or any project or any team member that's new, just getting to know them, asking them questions like, oh, so what have you done? How do you like to communicate? How do you like to have meetings scheduled? Do you like meetings to just be scheduled out of the blue, or would you prefer for me to give you a heads up on like what that meetings entail? And so sometimes it feels like it's frustrating because you're like, oh, I'm creating all these bespoke experiences for all these different people, but it's actually just a down payment on when you have to, get people to do that hard work. That is often like a little bit more, like you're like to your point of like you're trying to convince someone to do something. But if you've already done all of these other steps to let them know that you're going to be a great partner, that they're someone that you can trust, right? That you're someone that they can trust, like it becomes much easier to have this conversation. Then all of a sudden they're just like, yeah, B said that we have to do it this way. Right. And so that means we have to do it. Like B is not a type of person who would just arbitrarily say this, because I've spent all this time getting to know them and understanding what they want. And then they also have done a great job of understanding me. And I also like, so for instance, I would say Apple is probably one of the most difficult, like actually we're getting Netflix now. Netflix is like super easy breezy because people are so good at like one pre-reading everything. And also like generally we have like these larger bets. And so everyone generally understands why we're probably doing the thing that we're doing. But Apple's a great example of a place that you had to spend a lot of time actually trying to negotiate and actually trying to convince people to do something. And one of the things that was interesting about Apple is you had no idea who you'd be working with. So like, normally you could always say there's going to be like these 16 or 20 or 30 or 40 people that I'm interacting with. But at Apple, it could really be like hundreds of people depending on the project. And so then you have to like, so then it becomes like an even different thing where you have to like have people who you can have amplify your message. And so I would create these partnerships with leaders and say, hey, like, I know I'm going to be coming up on this project in XYZ time period. I know it's going to be kind of more difficult because like I'm going outside of like, let's say my normal org. And so like, I don't have any relationship with those different places. Is there any way that you can like tip me off to some good people who can help be evangelists for me over there? Right. So it's still this idea of relationships are the key point to creating an environment where you can convince people to do things that are necessary to be done. Right. And then, of course, it goes back to being accountable, being the person who people can always trust to get something done. And then also someone who leads with facts. Like I always thought it was funny when I would meet product managers who were just like, oh yeah, I told them they'll do this. And I was like, and then they'll be like, oh, they didn't do it. And I was like, well, what was your actual, what information did you provide to convince them that this is the right thing to do? They were like, well, and I'm like, yeah, people are smart, right? Like they're not gonna go jump off the bridge because you told them to jump off the bridge. Yeah. Like if you tell them there's a fire coming and if they don't jump off the bridge, they will die. They will jump off the bridge. Okay. So you have to give them actual facts so they can believe, so they can move forward.
This is so, first off, you sound like a manager that I would love to work for. But two, I love that, you're people centered and focused, right? And this reminds me of something you posted earlier today on Twitter. When I saw this, I was like, this is so good. Snap, snap, snap. But you mentioned how as a product manager, your role isn't to micromanage, but to micro plan with your team. And I was like, that is amazing, right? It's different from how, so a lot of people have very traumatic experiences with managers where, they're just always on their backs or whatever, but you're like, no, let's build a relationship. And then, you have this strategy that you use to like convince people and it's not even just convincing, but, I feel like it sounds like people on your team, they would be enthused to do the work that you're talking about, especially if you're adding and providing facts behind it.
Exactly. And that's the whole plan, because the goal, so it's so weird. When I first started off the product management, like I said, it was just like so interesting because that whole like CEO of your product thing was like very much the style of work. Right. And then they converted over to this like whole servant leaders thing, which also isn't quite right either. And to me, it's just more like, build a stellar team,
Yeah.
give them the right context, allow them the freedom to do what needs to be done, and be there for them every step of the way. And really great things happen.
That's so awesome. I love that. So now let's make a switch. So, you're currently the global lead for trans at Netflix and also the global lead for Black at Netflix, while also being a product manager. I don't know how you do all those things, but can we talk about your work in these Netflix affinity groups and some of the programs that you're working on?
Yeah, so outside of my actual work, being a product manager, it's exceptionally important to me to create systemic change, right? So we know systemic racism exists, we know systemic bias exists. So my goal is to create systemic change. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that. Part of it is like nonprofit work outside of Netflix, but also within Netflix. When I think about Black Ad and Transtar, especially, creating talent systems, right? Like, so how we recruit people, how we onboard people, how we retain people, how we respect their identity and who they are. These are all important parts of it. And then if you actually think about a company like Netflix, we can actually create generational wealth for people,
Yeah.
right? And so like I think about it as like every time we improve a system and make it safer for people who look like me or whose gender is similar to mine or who loves like me, then what we're really doing is creating a ripple effect in society, right? And so that's one of the reasons that I decided to, well, actually, it's really interesting because at first I was not going to put forth my name for Black At or Transtar. And then, folks encouraged me to do so because I was just like, to me, it's like, I just do this work. Like, it doesn't really matter to me what title that I have. All that matters to me is that like, I'm available and I'm willing to volunteer and do what's necessary to help ensure this work happens. But then they, folks are just like, no, like you really should actually just be the person who helps facilitate this thing. And and it was really great because actually I think being a product manager makes it a little bit easier for me because it's just more products to manage, right? Like these are products that have this opportunity to be improved, to be executed on at a much higher level. And thus, like by doing this work, it's been amazing. It's been amazing to see how many like just the impact and and it's everything because it's talent and recruitment are obviously really good aspects of this, but it's also like the idea of content. Like Netflix shouldn't be creating content that hurts people who look like us, right? Like we should be trying to amplify those stories. Like I was actually super impressed by this new P&G campaign that was it's about widening the lens, and so basically it has all of these stories that could be misconstrued as super negative for Black people, but then as soon as you kind of zoom out a little bit, you see the other side of it, and it's like all these beautiful stories. And that's my hope also when I think about Netflix's content and how we can kind of help change the world, right? Because when we think about like even the most recent shootings that happened recently, I just kept thinking to myself, I was like, if those people had spent more time seeing images of Black people who are amazing, like the Black people like you and I are, like the folks that like we hang out with, where we're just like, man, you are so freaking awesome. How might that have changed the outcomes of those incidents? And so that's really what all this work kind of culminates into. That is like, we create these ripples by creating opportunities, and then hopefully those opportunities then convert into a widening lens of everyone else in this world.
This is amazing. And, and that just goes in, while you were talking, I was speaking how like, we truly can't be what you don't see, right? Like I remember when I first saw my, a Black female engineer, I was like, what? Like, I didn't know we could do that. I had no idea. Like, I didn't even know what engineering was for real, to be honest with you. And that led me to go to Tuskegee University and major in electrical engineering. But it was because I had that exposure and I was able to see people like us. And so now, I'm curious, B, and this just popped up in my head, but what are some different ways that people can learn about the good work that Netflix is doing in the trans community and also for Black?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we actually have this really great YouTube channel, and I believe it's also a Twitter channel called We Are Netflix. And so that's actually where they promote a lot of just the specific content around the different initiatives. So for instance, you could have found out about Black Banks there. Also, the fact that Netflix is going to be like, the goal is to be carbon neutral. I think it's within 5 years. I think it might be a little bit sooner than that, but within 5 years to be carbon neutral. So that channel is actually a really great place to see us. Also, it's a great place to see what Transtar is doing, what Black At's doing, what Somos is doing, like our various ERGs and different things like that. And then also we have individual Netflix channels. So obviously there's Strong Black Legends. And so that's what's really great because it not only promotes Netflix Netflix's Black content, it also has like an associated podcast and things like that. So actually, one of the best things about working at a company like Netflix is that we realized that we have this great content and we also needed to put around it all this other information so you could see like the full picture of what Netflix is. Because it's really interesting because like if you think about myself, I work for the technology part of Netflix, right? So like technically, like I'm never going to be, well, actually, I shouldn't say I'm never going to be on production, because if I can sneak my way onto Ava DuVernay's production, I will sneak my way on there. Okay. Like Ava, if you do listen to this, just so you know, I'm here. Like if you just want me to hold something, I will hold it for you. Okay. And then also Miss Shonda Rhimes, I will hold your clip.
Anything.
Clipboard, like whatever. And with Bridgerton, I'm sorry I got mad that Reggie left, but like now that you explained it, I got you. Like I'm okay, right? You know, so but that's the whole point. But the point is like we're this huge technology company. Yeah. We're a huge technology company. We're also a huge financial company because we're thinking about finance and revenue and all these other things in completely different ways than, you know, most companies have ever thought about it, because we have a completely different model that we've kind of originated and we're trying to figure out. So like there's all these different aspects to the business. And so that's why I love these channels, because not only do they promote generally content and things like that, they also promote all the other aspects of the business and how we actually lead the way.
That's amazing. So there are many ways that, again, guys, for those of you who are listening, to connect and learn more about what Netflix is doing in all these different communities and all their good work. So now, B, I want to talk more because I was doing research on you. And for the past 6 years, you served on the board of directors for Howard Brown Health in Chicago, which is one of the largest LGBTQ organizations in the US, with over $200 million in an annual budget for serving tens of thousands of patients each year. So can we talk about your work as an activist for the LGBT community? I know we talked about it a little bit, but if we can get more into detail about just what you've been doing at Howard Brown.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So one of the things about me, so I've been out as a lesbian since 2004-ish, but I've only been out as trans since 2016. But under both of those, and I'm also a Black non-male in America, right? And so the thing that has always kind of come up in my life is this access to healthcare, right? Like, you know, what does it look like to be able to afford healthcare? What does it look like to be able to go into a space, talk to someone about my concerns about my healthcare, and actually have them listen and be respectful of who I am, those types of things. And so I actually, in my junior year of college, I had thyroid cancer. And so my college helped me like get through like the actual procedures, but Howard Brown Health was actually the place I went to for my follow-up care, because they treat you regardless of your ability to pay. And then also as like, you know, this lesbian, I was like, I'm a little scared to go to anyone else because like, I don't really know how they're going to treat me and type things like that. And so my relationship with Howard Brown started because they provide affirmative care for LGBTQ plus folks. But most importantly, Howard Brown believes that healthcare is a human right. And so what's really interesting about this organization is that when I first got started back in the day, it was like 5 facilities or something like that, $20 million organization, a couple hundred people maybe who worked for it. And now, you know, we're like this 200 million, so many locations, and then several more coming. In fact, we got a huge grant to build one on the south side of Chicago that's going to target LGBTQ plus youth, but specifically Black LGBTQ plus youth. And it also is going to be a facility that's going to serve Black folks. And that's one of the things that's involved about our practice, is that as we have learned more about the disparities in healthcare, even in major cities like Chicago, it's become clear that while our focus will always be LGBTQ plus healthcare, it is also about Black and brown folks too, right? Like, you know, I mean, the stories you hear about the Black elderly woman who was always afraid to go get her teeth checked, and she actually goes to Howard Brown now, and she's like, y'all treat me so well, right? And this is a heterosexual, cisgender, heterosexual Black woman who the safest place she feels to come get her care is actually, you know, an LGBTQ health center. And I think that's really what it was. Like for me, Howard Brown, obviously, you know, and then also as a trans person, like I'm a part of all these different trans groups, and we talk all the time about our healthcare and the scary experiences people have to go through to actually get healthcare, or how far they have to go, or the fact that they get their medications in very unsafe ways and there's no way to monitor it. And so therefore they could be actually damaging their bodies in a very severe way, right? And it's crazy because like Howard Brown, literally, there people come from hundreds of miles in all the Midwest. So even though it's like, it's one of the large LGBTQ centers in the country, it's like the only one in the Midwest. So you have people coming from Iowa and Indiana and Ohio just to come there, right? And so we're literally saving people's lives, right? And I think that it's also becoming a model for how healthcare should look. And so like my ultimate, so obviously LGBTQ plus healthcare is important to me, but I also want Black people to survive in healthcare. Yeah. And so one of the things that I love most about Howard Brown, and what I always could see that it could do, is that it could show people how healthcare should operate, right? Healthcare should not be difficult to ascertain. Your healthcare provider should not make you feel ashamed. They should not make you feel uncomfortable. You should be able to interact and feel comfortable. I remember the first time I had, okay, so this is like really funny. So I hate gynecology exams. And I remember the first time I had one at Howard Brown, I said, girl, why are you making me laugh? I was like, this is not how this is supposed to be. Like, this is supposed to be uncomfortable, right? But this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's like, I was like, you can make this uncomfortable stuff, it's like chill and fun. And like, it makes me feel like and it makes me feel like I want to come back to make sure I am getting that I'm staying on top of my healthcare. It makes me want to actually do the things you tell me to do, because we're partners. Like, we have a partnership. I trust you. You are the people who are going to help me. And I think that's really what it is. And then obviously like Howard Brown has expanded, because now we're of the size that we actually help other organizations. We consult with other organizations. During COVID, there were some organizations that were really struggling, and we were so fortunate to be able to give grants to those organizations to help them survive, to help them continue their programs. Because the other thing about Howard Brown is that once you realize that you have all these patients who have these healthcare needs, you start looking at the holistic picture. And then when you see patients who don't have, adequate housing, who don't have adequate, access to food, who don't have stable jobs, all of a sudden you go, okay, so we need to like create all these wraparound programs. And so, so one of the other organizations I support is YWCA of Chicago, and they're a partner of Howard Brown now, right? Because, YWCA has food programs, housing programs, they do a lot of the job training programs. And so then it becomes like, again, it's all about ripple effects. Everything is about like, if you can help one person here, and then they start, helping this other person over there, and the same thing with this organization is if you start helping this organization over here, then they help your patients. And then it just becomes like, oh, well, actually your patients don't have to come as often because they have stable housing. They are much more confident and happy because they actually have a job that affirms them, and thus they aren't using as much mental health care. So it's all it all works out together.
That's amazing. B, I just have to say, I am like so just inspired by you. I'm so excited for you. I'm just so proud of you. Like, just to see you doing phenomenal things is amazing, and it's going to inspire so many millions of other people. So yeah, your journey and all the things that you juggle, and I'm sure there's things you go through behind closed doors that people don't see, but you put in so much work to give back to everyone else. And I just want to say thank you.
It's so funny because I was telling so my co-CEO, he was talking about how he's an emotional vampire, that he needs to have people around him. I feel like I'm a good story emotional vampire. So like really it's all just me, just like, okay, I just need to be filled up. So more good stuff has to happen so I can continue to be filled up, so I can continue to do this work. So
amazing. Well, we appreciate you for just all the work that you do, for coming on the show. And then what are the best ways for our listeners to connect with you, follow you, share, like, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm B Pagels Minor everywhere. So Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Although I'm so bad at Instagram. Like people, like my little cousins, they were like, we have no hope for you for TikTok, but we thought you would be better at Instagram. And I was like, you know what? I'm of an age now that I don't have to participate in everything. And I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm B Pagels Minor everywhere. Also my website. So to that point of how to figure out how to change careers and things like that, I do have a lot of YouTube videos that I've recorded that they kind of give like context on some of the things I've talked about here. And I blog all the time. I blog a lot about just like what I think allow people to do work better. Right. That's something that's very important to me, because even though I think that people make work too hard. Yeah. And I'm always just like, it doesn't have to be that hard. Like it can be so simple if you would just let it be. Yeah. So that's why I spend a lot of time talking about those topics.
Awesome. I love it. Well, you guys, we had special guest B Pagels Minor on the show. Thank you so much, B, for coming on, sharing your story. And I know we're going to have you back. So stay tuned, guys. And we are so grateful for you to come on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.